That's what I was looking for, that screw. That screw goes in here and holds down the flash lever, flash contact lever, and the flash contact, of course, the moving flash contact. Now I've got to be careful here not to get this lever trapped on top of there, otherwise it'll get bent. Make sure it's clear of that cam. That's good. So as this cam revolves, you'll see that it closes the flash contact. There. Right, so far so good. Now, these three pieces, they are trouble. I need my best tweezers, and it'll be fun to get this back together. First of all, we'll start with our spring and the main component. The spring normally sits on here around that boss. There's a groove there for it. The end of the spring has a curved hook there which fits around that little brass boss there. The other end of the spring hooks up to the arm on this piece when that's fitted into position. So first I have to work out which way round that spring goes on here. Let me have a quick look. Assembled, that will sit in that orientation. And that tells me that that spring will have to be in that orientation. Right, so now I know which orientation the spring goes in. I'll see if I can get it into place. It looks a little bit distorted, which may mean that someone's done something cruel to it. It's unusual to see it loose. Normally it is sitting fairly firmly in position. Right, let's see if I can get that hooked on there. Yeah, it's certainly a little bit less than desirable. Ooh, getting it over that post is tricky. Right. Okay, that needs to fit down into that groove. That should fit down behind there. It's sitting there now. Our other component sits on the top here. And that spring hooks onto it to hold everything in place. That's the theory. And what have we got? No, that's not right. I must have that spring on front to back. Okay, so off with that component. Have another go at this spring. Some staining on that component, I'm not sure what it is. Let's get it off. Ah, doesn't want to stay there. It's one of those jobs you need 4 hands for. 4 very small hands. Okay, let's just change my grip to another pair of tweezers and use my finest tweezers to manoeuvre this spring into position. Now, just popped away. This is an awkward piece on a good day, but this is not a good day. Let's go right round, see if I can hook it on the other way. It doesn't want to stay hooked in position. That's better. Right, that component is together, complete, held together with its spring. And long may it stay like that. Right, molybdenum paste on this point at the end here, that's where it latches, and it certainly needs a bit of paste there. That's all. Lower it into position, and it goes on this post here. And the synchronization, because things need to be synchronized. Anything that's got gears on is normally timed in some fashion. And I'm just checking the position of things here. When it's latched back with this latch, this cam should be oriented so that this lever is free of it. It doesn't touch it. That all looks good. Now I need to hook in the spring that drives that lever. That's it. So that's all sitting in place. And a bit of molybdenum paste. And I want to put it around the toe of that cam, because that's where this lever comes in contact with it, and I need that to run smoothly. That's all that's required. The spacers, 1, 2. The screws, 1, 2. Our MX lever, and importantly this piece here, this lever. That lever actually forms part of the release. And I'm going to clean that to make sure it's all clean. It hasn't got any oil or grease on it that will stop it moving smoothly and easily. That all looks good. So we can assemble these components together. A spacer goes there. A spacer goes there. This component holds everything in place. That lever must be positioned so it's on the inside of this piece. That's looking good. The plain screw goes at this end of the speed train, the sync mechanism. And the MX lever goes on here. So we've got to get it down underneath that spring. What's that come from? And that fits in place with its screw. I'll get that started. Got that most of the way down. I need to move its return spring into place, or its detent spring into place. And then I can do that screw up tight, check that it swings, and it just latches into either position. And what it does is it brings this lever into contact with the cam or out of contact with the cam, and so affects whether it acts on the flash sink or not. That's good. And tighten up those two screws, make sure they're down tight. Next we want the B lever. It's spring and screw. Again, that needs to be clean. If there's any amount of oil or grease on components like that, what happens is that because they're only moved under the impetus of very small springs, is what will happen is if you've got grease or oil on them, it'll actually stick them to a surface like glue, so that the spring doesn't have enough power to shift them. Right, well, I've got that screw in place and I've hooked the spring in place. The spring goes to the inside of this lever here, pushing it outwards, and it goes behind this lever here, pushing it towards the centre. This is the B lever. Now I need to put in the shutter release lever here. These are fun to put in because they have this tiny little return spring which is fairly useless, and it has to fit carefully down in the slot there. And then it pivots on a very small post right here. And when the shutter is cocked, it's unblocked so that it can move, and that presses on this little piece which releases all that flash sink stuff. So at that point I'll get my molybdenum paste, and there's a couple of points I want to make sure are lubricated. One is on here. That is actuated by something called the bird pawl on the main operating ring. On this surface, that lever lifts the pallets in and out of contact with the retard gear train. On this surface, at the back of that arm there, that gets swung in and out by the, or swung out by the main drive ring as it returns. That'll do. So the main drive ring next. We're just about ready to close this shutter up. So I'll clean that. This would probably be the component that most needs to be lubricated inside the shutter. It's the one that's doing the hardest work. So some molybdenum paste. Around the inside surface, that's where it runs on the shutter body here. On the outside surface, that's where it latches closed when it's cocked off that, with that catch there. And the bird pawl. The bird pawl so called because it looks vaguely like a bird. Two sections there. That little tab that sticks up, that's where that lever is guided in slots here, and at the front where it actually hits this blade actuating, that lever on the blade actuating ring there. That should be sufficient. Let's see if we can get this in a bit better. So, normally I'd cock the shutter by bringing that lever across, and it makes it much easier to get the spring back underneath here. Swing that B lever back out of the way because it's always blocking things. Swing out this arm here. Swing that arm back out of the way. Pop that B lever completely back out of the way because it's jumped back in as soon as it was given an option. Check that the bird pawl is properly seated. Get that back out of the way. And I need to hook the spring back over its post. If I can just get to it. There's its post. Everything's sitting there pretty much correct. Is that lever out? It is. Now this lever here, that's the catch that holds the shutter in the cocked position, so its return spring needs to be hooked into place. There it is. And the main driver ring then it tried to jump out of place just to cause me grief. That's it. That's okay. I want to clean up this. This is the shutter speed setting ring. I just need to remove any old grease and dirt from here and replace it with fresh lubricant in the appropriate amounts and in the appropriate places. And of course I'm using the moly paste again. It's around the inside edge so that it'll rotate freely when you set it up on the... I might back that out a bit. I'm not sure we're getting this in sharp focus. Let's just back it out a bit. This position is where the 1/500th speed spring gets compressed, and it takes quite a bit of force to set that, so a bit of lubricant there is good. I'm just getting a few threads there that's picked up off the cotton bud, I'd say. Let's get rid of that. To be very careful when you're cleaning things with those Q-tips or cotton buds, because if they leave threads behind, loose threads, they'll inevitably find their way into something that's fairly sensitive, like the retard gear train, and they'll jam things up. So I'm looking very closely at that, make sure that's clear. Right, this can be put into position. Making sure I don't trap that post on the retard gear train under it, or the B lever here needs to be fished out if it's trying to burrow underneath, which it was. That's the B position. This is the 1 second position. That is the 1/10 of a second position, but it sounds too fast to me. So it means that somebody did disturb the retard gear train, and the shutter therefore can't have been running accurately since it was last serviced, because I haven't disturbed it. And now I'll have to go to the trouble of sorting that out. That should be about 1/5 of a second there, I think. It's about there. That's much too quick for 1/10 of a second. And this would be a 25th. Well, the 25th and the 10th sound exactly the same. So someone has buggered that up. I'm not overjoyed to find that, because I hate having to set that. But I suppose that's what I'll have to do. So I'll bring you back once I've got that done. Alright, here I've got the shutter and I'm attempting to get the speed train correctly positioned. Now I've got a section of the repair manual here which I've laboriously typed out because it was taken from a scan from a very old document, and they refer to things by various names. This thing here they call the main lever. Here we have our retard gear train, they call that the retard section. This they call the pallet end. And this one they call the, what do they call this one? The retard section. What do they call this one? The retard lever. They call this end the retard lever and this one the pallet section. And the instructions for setting the speeds correctly on a shutter like this. This is a synchro contour, but it's an early synchro contour. Basically it's the same as the contour rapids with the addition of the flash sync mechanism allowing for the two flash sync speeds. So basically this is what they say. Timing the contour rapid shutter. The retard section of the shutter should still not be tightened down. While slightly loose, the speed timing may be adjusted. The stroke of the retard lever at its end of the retard section may be controlled. The amount of engagement of the pallet at the other end of the retard section may be changed. Move the pallet end of the retard section towards the centre of the shutter for less engagement of the pallet and shorter exposures on the speeds in which the pallet is used, 1 to 1/10 of a second. Move the other end of the retard section towards the centre of the shutter to increase the length of the retard lever engagement with the main lever for a longer exposure. Over movement is possible. A point can be reached where the retard lever will hang up the main lever, preventing complete action of the shutter. In order to simplify the adjustment of the retard, start with both ends of the retard section all the way towards the centre of the shutter. Then back the retard lever end off slightly and tighten the screws. Test the adjustment by setting and releasing the shutter, but you must hold the main lever down while you do this. When the shutter is released, it should operate smoothly, delivering approximately a 1 second exposure. Allow the release lever to return to its rest position immediately after tripping, or the bulb lever could engage with the main lever. Now this is interesting. If the main lever, this piece, makes a popping sound when it disengages from the retard lever during the setting stroke, or if the main lever hangs against the retard lever after being released, the retard lever end is too close to the centre. Loosen the screws and move the retard lever end just a small amount towards the outside of the shutter. Tighten the screws and test again. That sounds clear enough. Now we get to the funny bit. As soon as smooth action is achieved, replace the speed cam. This is the speed cam. And check the shutter action at the 10th and 1/25th settings. If the retard section is positioned properly, the 1/10th second setting will be clearly slower than the 1/25th second setting. If the 10th second setting is faster than the 1/25th second, then the retard lever end, at this end, was moved too far towards the outside of the shutter and will need to be repositioned. In other words, moved back towards the centre. So it's a juggling act. And it's this juggling act that I'm now going to attempt to do, and I'm not going to bother doing it on camera because I could easily be here half an hour. It's a tedious process, and trying to get the correct speed out of this is very awkward. My problem with this shutter was that the 10th of a second setting was clearly as fast or faster than the 25th of the second setting. So now it means that somebody had had that retard section, as they call it, off the shutter for cleaning and had put it back on, and they had buggered up the timing. Now I've got to get it right.